The African Export-Import Bank, Afreximbank, and the government of the Bahamas have signed the hosting agreement for the bank's annual meeting and the Afro-Caribbean Investment Forum. Both events will take place on the island in June. Arise international correspondent Adefemi Akinsoya has this update from the Bahamas on what to expect.
Signed, sealed and delivered. The government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the African Export-Import Bank have signed the agreement for the Bahamas to host the 31st Afrexim annual meetings and the third edition of the Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum. For the success of this union, what would it be? Would you imagine it be a diversification away from reliance on your relationship with the United States, for example, visa-free travel exemptions for all African countries? If you could identify one single thing that would be your greatest goal within this collaboration, what would that be?
Our country, my foreign minister, we have been working aggressively to look at the abolition of visa travel between African countries. We've already done so in a number of countries, and we're continuing to do that. And we're also, at the same time, establishing relationships, formal diplomatic relationships with varying countries.
The AAM will be held here in Nassau, the Bahamas, from the 12th to the 14th of June 2024. Acknowledging the work still to be done, Orama also showed his pride in the historic deals already done.
The annual meeting gives us an opportunity to do an early celebration of the tremendous successes we've achieved these past 2 years. It's unbelievable, it's incredible. Just under 2 years ago, we literally launched the Caribbean project. We opened the partnership agreement that was intended to bring Caribbean states into the membership of Afreximbank, signing the partnership agreement that is akin to the establishment agreement of the African Export-Import Bank. Today, 11 of the 15 Caribbean states have signed, 9 have ratified. The agreement came into force literally a few weeks after it was opened for signature. Based on that, Afreximbank Board of Directors approved a limit of $1.5 billion for the CARICOM countries to rise to $3 billion when the other remaining 4 countries join.
Highlighting the possibility of greater collaboration on an immediately tangible level will be the local economy and markets on display at the Grand Bahama Island.
We are developing an Afro-Caribbean marketplace in conjunction with Afreximbank. And so we're excited to have all 54 African countries represented, about 20 countries in the Caribbean, as well as the islands of the Bahamas, where you get a taste of what each country has to offer. So it's the food, the art, the craft, the culture. And we look at it as being an amazing opportunity for trade, for logistics, for those who want to experience Africa in one place, experience the Caribbean in one place. And so we're really, really excited about this project.
Indeed, there's much to look forward to. And with that, the first bricks along the last stretch toward the Afrexim annual meeting and the Afro-Caribbean Investment Forum are paved with the hopes and anticipation of 2 regions and their joint collaborative future. Looking ahead. Adefemi Akinsoya, Arise News, Nassau, the Bahamas.
Well, Adefemi is not done yet. She joins me now on Newsnight. Good to see you, Adefemi. It's been quite a while. Now, it looks like both parties are moving forward, moving ahead after the signing of that MOU in 2022. Tell us what this event represents.
Oh, Ngozi, it's so great to hear your voice. But yes, it's a very, very exciting time here in the Bahamas, and indefinitely as it pertains to Afreximbank itself. So what we had today was the hosting agreement. I know that we've spoken so much about Afreximbank's annual meeting, and we're throwing around the Afro-Caribbean Investment Forum, but that's not what's happened today. What happened today, what we were here to participate in, here to witness, was the hosting agreement ceremony. Essentially, you have the Commonwealth of Bahamas saying you're more than welcome, Afreximbank and the rest of Africa, to come over to the Bahamas and hold these very important events here. Those events are firstly the 31st edition of Afreximbank's annual meetings, and these by definition happen every year. It's a good opportunity to hear from the bank, hear from the shareholders, hear from the leadership, the communications arm, about what is going on in the bank, what they've been able to achieve in the year, and what they plan to do so looking forward. And in addition to the Afrexim annual meeting, you also have the third annual edition of the Afro-Caribbean Investment Forum. That's far younger in comparison to the Afrexim annual meeting, but it's still quite a significant collaboration and meeting point of African businesses and entrepreneurs and African people and their counterparts here in the Caribbean. And what happens is there is more than conversations being made and hands being shaken, but millions of dollars worth of investment being transferred each way. And essentially what these ties are hoping to foster is greater links between both of these powerhouses. And I think it's really important to make sure that we mention powerhouse when we're looking at Africa in this context. The fact that Afreximbank has been championing reaching out the arm of African investment, African development aggressively over the past 31 years, but certainly under President Orama's leadership, he's been very, very clear in his ambitions to reverse engineer the African continent away from the hallmarks of colonialism and focus on the continent being able to stand on its own 2 feet and take pride and take stock of its own potential, of its own already existing successes, and leverage that for the benefit of Africans and the continent itself. So what we're seeing here in this collaboration with Bahamas in this instance, but definitely across the whole CARICOM standpoint, is that we are seeing that there is far more value to be heard, far more value to be had, more deals to be signed, billions more of dollars to be made between both of these instances. And it is quite significant because as it stands now, though Africa only contributes around 2.2% of the Caribbean's exports, it's still quite significant because if you look at the Bahamas itself, we do know they're quite heavily reliant on its economic relationship with the United States, and whether or not they want to change that, it is interesting that they're looking towards Afreximbank to guide them in this new partnership with Africa. And it would be very interesting, very exciting to see what it will materialize into starting in June.
Yes, indeed. And what can participants expect from this event in June?
So what we are hearing, Ngozi, is that you have the entire leadership of Afreximbank, but also hundreds of delegates from across the African continent coming down to the Bahamas. Of course, in addition to delegates and politicians and business leaders, it's implied that there is a hope that there will be far more African people in Nigeria and across the African continent looking at this opportunity to come over to the Bahamas and see what is happening, see what's at stake in terms of an economic relationship, not just at the macro level, but at the micro level, seeing how businesses can trade together in this way. If you remember from the package that we just played before coming to start this conversation, you'll know that we spoke to Minister Moxie, and she is really focused on making sure that when these events do happen in June, we will have more people coming over to that part of the Bahama island. There are several islands, hundreds of islands that constitute the Bahamas. She was speaking about a certain cluster of islands and the markets therein, and how she thinks that would be a wonderful way to foster collaborative trade between Africans coming from the continent and the people in Bahamas, so that you wouldn't have to leave the Caribbean to have access to African products and services and vice versa. But essentially essentially what this event is going to do is become the first meeting point for many Africans and many Caribbeans to look at each other face to face and see ways in which they can forge a common understanding and a common union for the betterment of both sides. And it is quite unprecedented in and of itself, looking at the ways in which Africa can be the stronger arm, essentially, in leveraging trade between these two regions. Essentially, these are ethnically Black and African people, absolutely, but clearly there's been quite a disparity as it pertains to cultural differences, economic differences too. But it will be interesting to see, besides the conversations and the deals being signed at the macro level, I'm really interested to seeing what changes can be had on the everyday level. When we were speaking during the event, I did ask Prime Minister Philip Davis of Bahamas what he was going to do, what metric he needed in order for him to establish a real goal that we can see and measure. And I did mention to him perhaps looking at visa-free travel exemptions for all African countries. Some African countries are able to travel to Bahamas without a visa. Cape Verde, I believe Malawi, along with one of them. Nigeria is not one of them, and that is quite significant, isn't it? So I would like to see, I think many people rather would like to see ways in which at that level, at that immediate level, the fostering of a relationship between the Bahamas and indeed the Caribbean can be had with Africans. Because if you do want to foster this type of economic relationship, essentially it's going to have to be easy for Africans to come over to the Caribbean and vice versa. And so one of the first ways that they can tackle that is making sure that Africans, Nigerians specifically, are able to get visa-free travel into the Bahamas and throughout the Caribbean. I do think that that's quite exemplary. In addition to that, we do look at how the Bahamian economy is set up and find out ways in which African companies, African entrepreneurs can utilize ways, again, to foster economic relationships for the betterment of both sides. And that will be something that I'll be looking quite closely at come June.
We're looking forward to a mutually beneficial relationship there between Africa and, of course, the Caribbean nations. Now, what are the standouts from the Bahamian economy that makes it so attractive for Afreximbank? And I want to believe that Afreximbank is very well invested in the Caribbean nations.
Absolutely. So let me start off with, when we're looking at the standouts from the Bahamian economy, first and foremost, it is tourism. And it's very easy to understand why. I'm sure you saw the piece to camera at the end of the package, Ngozi. It is gorgeous out here. The weather is wonderful, the palm trees, the people, the culture, it is lovely. So it's very easy to understand why tourism is such a money maker for the Bahamas and for many islands across the Caribbean. In addition to that, we are also looking at Bahamas and their financial services. That's also quite a standout. Many people do look to the Caribbean and the Bahamas specifically for ways in which that they can show and share their own personal funds. Different types of companies can be set up here. So that's another thing that highlights the Bahamas' economic prowess. But certainly the big standouts are tourism and their financial services. But when we do look at what they look towards the African continent for, they do import a lot of our natural resources. Naturally, if we're looking at Nigeria, of course, petroleum products, uranium and the like, it is definitely a mutually beneficial relationship as it stands, but there's definitely so much scope for it to get bigger, wider. And even when we're looking at things from a micro level, there's definitely more potential for a people-led collaboration between the two of them. I mean, Ngozi, I'm sure you'd love to come over to the Bahamas. It's quite lovely. It really is.
Can't wait. I mean, since you're there, maybe I should catch the next available flight. Adefemi Akinsoya, thank you so much. Arise International correspondent there, speaking to us on the groundbreaking, historic, deal between Afreximbank and the Bahamas.